Special rules for certain employees. There are a handful of categories of employees or situations that we need to look at that have slightly different kind of situations that are going to lead to slightly different treatment for tax purposes. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at clergy, ministers, pastors. We're going to look at members of religious orders, foreign employers, and members of the military, and a few details about each of these. We start with clergy. We're talking here about somebody who works in a church, runs the church, the minister, the pastor, whatever the term may be. Well, members of the clergy need to include in income any salary that they get, and also any amount they receive for performing masses, marriages, baptisms, funerals, whatever it is that they're doing in that capacity as a clergy. If they are paid for it, they need to include that as income. Now, a pension, the clergy for a pension is generally, the pension for a clergy is generally treated as a normal pension. And so nothing different between that pension for a clergy and pension for somebody who is not a clergy. But oftentimes clergy are provided either a house to live in, a place to live, or are given a housing allowance. Well, the rental value of a home, if it's included, they're given that home to live in, the rental value of that home, including utilities, is excludable from income, as is any housing allowance that they receive. Okay, now you're either going to get one or the other. You're either going to get a home provided or you're going to get a housing allowance. You're not going to get both. But whatever it is that you receive is excludable from income. Now, the amount of the exclusion cannot be more than the reasonable pay for services rendered. You can't just make up some huge number here. It needs to be a reasonable amount. Any allowance that's designated for the cost of utilities is excludable up to the actual utility cost. So you can't exclude more than the actual costs of the utilities. And this home or the allowance needs to represent compensation for services rendered as that clergy, as the ordained, licensed, commissioned minister, whatever the case may be. It needs to be for services that are being provided as a clergy. Now, that rental value of the home or that housing allowance does need to be included as earnings from self-employment if self-employment tax is applicable. So let's go ahead and look at an example here, put some kind of numbers to all of this. Reverend Joanna Baker is a full-time minister. The church allows her to use a parsonage that has an annual fair rental value of $24,000. The church pays her annual salary of $67,000, of which $7,500 is designated for utility costs. And her actual utility costs during the year were $7,000. So not the entire amount that was designated for utility. Now, for income tax purposes, Reverend Baker is going to exclude $31,000 from gross income, that $24,000 fair rental value of the parsonage, plus $7,000 of the allowance for the utility costs, because again, you can exclude only the actual amount. So, in terms of gross income, there's going to be $60,000 of income. There's $59,500 of salary, because that salary of $67,000 included the $7,500 utility allowance. But $500 of that utility allowance was not used, and so that becomes income. It's not excludable because it wasn't actually used for utilities. And so Joanna Baker's going to have $60,000 of gross income. Now, her income for self-employment tax purposes, however, is $91,000, which is the $67,000 salary, including the allowance for utility costs, plus that $24,000 fair rental value of the parsonage. And so what it is that's going to be taxable and what it is that's going to be included as self-employment income for other purposes is going to be different. So that was looking at the clergy, the leaders of those churches. We next look at members of religious orders. And so this isn't the clergy. These are people that are part of or a member of that religious organization. And the issue that we have here is, what about their income that they have that is being turned over to the religious order because they've taken a vow of poverty? Okay, as a member of this religious order, I'm not going to earn anything personally, but the work that I do that generates an income, I'm going to turn that over to the religious order. And so the question we have here is, who's paying taxes on that? And it comes down to whether or not the services were performed by the member specifically for the order. Okay, so if the services are performed for the order, they're an agent of the order in the exercise of duties required by the order, the amounts that are turned over to the order are not included as income for that individual. Okay, they earned it, they received it even perhaps, but if it's turned over to the religious order as part of their, what they did to get that money was part of their duties, then that is not going to be taxable to them. But if they perform services outside of the order, okay, they're directed to work outside the order, and those services rendered are not an exercise of duties required by the order, it is going to be taxable unless both of these conditions are met. First, the services are the kind of services that are ordinarily the duties of the members of the order. They are part of the duties that the member must exercise for the religious order as its agent. Now, all of this really comes down to if the money is going to the religious order and it was conducted on behalf of the religious order, it is not going to be taxable to that individual member of the order. Next, looking at a foreign employer. And so we're looking at here a situation where the employer is a foreign entity. A U.S. citizen who works in the United States for a foreign government, an international organization, foreign embassy, or any foreign employer must include salary in income. Okay, you work there, that's your income. The fact that they're paid, that the person paying you, the organization paying you, is not a U.S. organization doesn't mean you don't have to pay taxes on it. Those employees of an international organization or a foreign government in the U.S. are exempt from Social Security and Medicare employee taxes, but this employee needs to pay self-employment taxes on earnings from services performed in the U.S., even though they are not self-employed. And finally, military pay. A member of a military service must generally report payments received as a service member as wages for tax purposes. Now, the exception to this is retirement pay, which is taxable as a pension. And so members of the military service need to pay taxes on that income that they received being a member of the military. So there's just a handful of specific situations. I don't want you to get lost in the details of them. Be aware that there's different issues for clergy. There's a little bit different issue there for members of religious orders. We also have then members or people employed by a foreign employer and also the military in terms of what we do with each of these categories of people.